Welcome to Lee County Pod. This is Jack Campbell, your facilitator. Here is our host, Pete Malignick. Pete, would you please introduce our guest today?
Our guest today is Richard Trout, and he's a writer of primarily nonfiction. Rich, is that fair to say? Welcome to our Lee County podcast series. Good to have you here.
Nice to be here.
And to start off with, who is Richard Trout?
Okay, I would say Richard Trout is number one, creative, sensitive, impatient, and I would say goes against the grain, likes to be different, and loves to write. I also have a son, and he's 19 years old. His name is Evan, and somehow he got the ability to be mechanical, even though neither one of his parents is any bit mechanical. So that's one of my weaknesses. You know, I really need, if I have trouble at home, you know, with the plumbing or something else, I have to call for help, because I am not mechanical whatsoever. I have two parents, and they've been married since they were, I think, they got together junior year of college at McMurray College in Southern Illinois. And they've been married ever since, and they're both 82 now, and they're both in good health. I've been blessed to have two of the best parents in the world.
And you're from the Chicago area originally, Rich?
Yeah, I grew up in LaGrange, Illinois, and that's about a half an hour outside of Chicago. And most of my book that's coming out takes place, I'd say, in the Chicago suburbs, like not only LaGrange, but also the suburbs around it, like Brookfield, Western Springs, Hinsdale, Burr Ridge. And then there's also scenes that take place in Chicago, because that's where, in high school, that's where we went to have fun. And the story, it moves to New Mexico in 2001, and that was right after I got a master's degree in journalism. And so my first job as a reporter was at the Hobbs News-Sun. And in my 20s, I was not on track in my 20s, so I actually was a copy editor, and I didn't like it. You know, I wanted to do the writing. And I left that job, and then I think I applied for about 22 jobs in the Chicago area, and only one of them offered me a job, and that was in Oak Brook, Illinois. So I would have had to commute like an hour a day, every day, in the Chicago traffic. Plus, you know, it was a low-paying job, and I lived in an apartment that was pretty expensive. So I decided not to do that job. And then it hit me that I should try New Mexico, because I went on vacation there a year before that, and I loved it there. I was able to wear a t-shirt in February, and the people were a lot nicer than they are in the Chicago area. And I had a couple interviews in Albuquerque, but those didn't work out. When I got home, I had a message on my answering machine from the Hobbs News-Sun. And they wanted to fly me down for an interview and to write a few stories. And the first story I got to write was about Brian Urlacher. And that was his first year playing for the Chicago Bears. And I got to go to the event at Lovington High School where they were retiring his number. It was at a basketball game, and they were actually retiring his number, for when he played football. And I got to write the sidebar story, and so for that I got to interview all his former friends, coaches, and it was almost like that interview experience was kind of designed for me because I'm a Chicago Bears fan and I know a lot about Urlacher already. One thing I didn't know is that he's from Lovington. Mm-hmm. So that was my start to the Hobbs News-Sun. And then in 2012, I went to the University of the Southwest, and I taught English. And then in 2020, I got a doctorate, and that's a DBA, or a Doctor of Business Administration. And I'd say, I guess it was in December 2023 when I left USW, and then I got with the News-Sun again in April of 2024, and I left the News-Sun last week because I need to focus on the book, and the book is about to come out, so I wanted to really focus on the marketing of that book.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the book. It's pretty much an autobiography. So give us some, how did you put the book together?
Okay, well, the main purpose in me writing the book was to inspire other people who have Asperger's syndrome to realize that they can achieve almost anything. When I was in my 20s, I was having a lot of problems, and I wouldn't say I was really growing much, and I believe that's because I wasn't following my God-given purpose. When I was in second grade, I remember a class where we watched a film strip about a boy who published a book. And he got a lot of attention, and the book was really good, especially considering he was only 6, 7 years old. And during that film strip, I just felt a fire in my heart. I just felt this confidence and excitement, energy that I've never felt before. And when that film strip ended, that's when I realized I could do that. I could write a book too. But my book would be even better than that boy's book and the film strip. And it took me a really long time to actually get that book written. I finally did that. I started working on it in the second week of June 2023, and I was done with the first draft by the end of August. But that's just the beginning, because when you write a book, I'd say that's maybe just about 10% of the work. You have to keep revising and revising and revising until you think you're going crazy. and you can't just settle for less, because you want to produce a really good product that people enjoy, people can relate to, and they don't get hung up on typos and stuff that are in the book. They don't get hung up on extra details that you don't need in that book. And for me as a writer, I have to do a lot of cutting because I write a lot. I guess it's kind of like Stephen King. He's prolific, but he's gotten to a level where he can be prolific and not worry about being concise. And so I've noticed that his writing, it's just not the same as it used to be, like in the 70s, 80s. Because I think he's kind of spoiled as a writer. Anything he writes, it'll sell millions of copies. And that was probably, I would say that was the first author I was obsessed with. And that's because in 6th grade, I went over to my friend's house, Mike Padberg, and he's in the book. And there's a lot of funny scenes with Mike in there. And Mike had a mother, a stepfather. They had a bookcase with a lot of books in it, and there was one book that really caught my eye, and that was The Shining by Stephen King. And it was silver and black, and it had a picture of a boy's face on the cover. And I would occasionally go to that book and open it up and flip the pages and smell the pages, because I thought the smell of a book was the best smell in the world. And I would read the stuff back cover, the blurbs where people are saying good things about the book. And I'd say about a year later, that's when I decided to finally read The Shining. And when I read The Shining, it was just a remarkable experience. It scared me. It fascinated me. It made me want to keep reading. And I remember the weekend that I was really getting into the book, that was a weekend when my parents were not at the house. So it was just me and my brother, and I was in 7th grade. And I would be reading The Shining for hours and hours, staying up till 2 a.m. And I would be doing this in our living room. In the corner of the living room was a rocking chair. And I think there was even a blanket or an Afghan on the rocking chair. And every time I looked over at that rocking chair, I could swear it was rocking. It just seems like it was actually rocking, which made the experience of reading The Shining all that more frightening. Mm-hmm. And I just enjoyed that experience of being really scared. And I kept on reading Stephen King after that. I read Christine, Cujo, The Dead Zone, and all of those were really good, except for Cujo. That was just okay. And that obsession with Stephen King, it didn't last forever. Later on in life, I got obsessed with other authors. like John Irving, who wrote The World According to Garp. And my favorite book for a long time was A Widow for 1 Year by John Irving. I'd say that started like soon after I moved to Hobbs in 2001. And it lasted until September of last year, when I finally read a book that was better than A Widow for 1 Year. And that book is called Wellness by Nathan Hill. And in 2017, Nathan Hill came out with a book called The Nix. And that's capital N as in Nancy, I-X. The Nix is a mythical creature, and it's a horse. And people will get on the horse, like in their dream. And it'll be a really nice ride on the horse. You know, everything's beautiful. You're having a good time. And then that horse starts to go faster and faster. And then it's getting out of control. And it's hard to hang on to that horse. Like it's a wild ride, and you're scared, you know, you're gonna get thrown off. And Nathan Hill used that metaphor, you know, to symbolize his whole book. It was a metaphor for that whole book. And what makes books, I'd say, what makes it an amazing experience to read is that, first of all, you can relate to a lot of the stuff in the book. Sometimes you almost feel like you are the main character. That's what happened to me when I read Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. I felt like the main character in the movie. He's played by Brad Pitt. I thought that character was me, and that the main character is neurotic, and he is anxious about a lot of stuff, and that's me. Like, I get anxiety very easily. Go ahead.
Let's go ahead. I don't think we've mentioned it, but the title of your book is Up All Night.
Yes.
Okay. So why that title?
I titled it Up All Night, and then there's a subtitle, and that's An Aspie's Memoir of Chasing Girls in Quicksand. I had the Up All Night title in mind, I'd say during about half the writing process of that first draft. And then in the middle, that's when I realized I could do a subtitle. And I had a couple friends who told me that I needed a subtitle. So I added An Aspie's Memoir of Chasing Girls in Quicksand, because that's what my entire life has been like. You know, even recently. With Asperger's syndrome, that's a social disability. And my story begins in 6th grade with a chapter called 6th Grade. Because that's when I realized there was something wrong with me, and I had no idea what it was. Because it seems like I was the only kid at that grade school who could not talk. I had so many thoughts going through my head, and I got overstimulated by, you know, all the noise and stuff. So I didn't even know what to say to anybody. And if you wanted to talk to me, you had to be the first person to talk. I don't think I learned how to be the first person to talk until about, I'd say after grad school. Like maybe around 25, 26.
So, Richard, your book is a memoir, but also some kind of a template for people with Asperger's, how to navigate through and survive and thrive.
Yes. Yes, I'm hoping that the book reaches a lot of people that do have Asperger's or autism, and that they'll be able to relate to what's in the story, and then they find out about how I moved halfway across the country to Hobbs, New Mexico, and that changed everything. Before I lived in Hobbs, I thought most people were just mean and self-centered because I lived in a metro area where people are reserved. And like when I came to Hobbs, I actually had to learn how to do small talk. And that was important to learn because I was a reporter and I had to talk to people every day by phone, in person, by email. And I guess I adapted to this environment. There's a saying that when in Rome, you should do as the Romans do. And so I started to become more like somebody who lives here, like friendly, outgoing, polite. Before I came here, barely anybody said sir or ma'am. And in Hobbs, it's almost everybody who says sir or ma'am. And that respect to your fellow human being in this area, it just amazed me, and it kind of it really brightened my world. And I realized that most people are actually nice people who have good intentions. They're not selfish like I used to think. And I'd say after about 6 months of doing my job as a reporter, that's when I started to love the interviews. You know, that was the best part of the job, doing the interviews, because I got to hear people's stories. And they were passionate about their stories. And I wanted to express those stories as well as I could to the community. So I would work really hard on every story. I would act as if that story was the most important story I've ever written, every time I got a new one.
Well, you brought some books with you today. So let's go ahead and start with those right there. What are special about those books right there?
Okay, these first two are called Technopoly and The Glass Cage. The Glass Cage is by Nicholas Carr. Technopoly is by Neil Postman. And Neil Postman, before this book, he wrote a really good book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And that came out in the 80s. And that was about a time when everybody was watching TV. You know, people just, at night, all they did was watch TV. And he noticed, I guess he was concerned about that. And he started to notice, like, people were not learning as much. They weren't reading as much. And he predicted that this would get a lot worse. And it did get a lot worse because the internet came around. And then people had TVs right in their hand. The Glass Cage, this one's about how the internet actually changes your brain. And it makes you dumber. Like, instead of going for a deep sea dive like a scuba diver, and you would do that if you read a book. Like, it takes long-term concentration to read a book. Instead of doing that, people, all they were doing was surfing on top of the water, going from one place to another, and they were never really using their critical thinking and their imagination. And now our society is, I would say, noticing the effects of that, especially with young people. A lot of them are traumatized now, like, or they're lonely, and they're just not satisfied. And that's because the internet, it doesn't want you to be satisfied. It wants you to always go back and surf some more.
One thing, Rich, you mentioned coming to Hobbs and the difference between where you lived and where you live now, and the word that comes across to me is community. And I think that a problem for so many people today, not just young people, but they're so dependent upon a network, a global network of things they never really touch except virtually, and people they never see, maybe virtually. And there's a very big difference between that community and a network to me.
Right. Yeah, the communication skills of younger people actually suck, because all they've been doing is playing on their phones all day, instead of asking out, like, instead of going on a date by asking someone out in person. That's like almost, it's almost unbelievable for them to even imagine that. They have to do it online. They have to do it on a phone, on a laptop, and I have a 19-year-old son, and I've tried to encourage him to maybe get to know people out in the real world. But, like, he hasn't really taken my advice. He hasn't joined a church. And I believe joining a church is probably the best way to get to know other people. Evan, he's a really good worker, and he's actually an entrepreneur. So he meets a lot of people, through his jobs. He owns his own business, and that's called ET Cleans, and he lives in Fredericksburg, Texas. And ET Cleans is actually a thriving business right now, and he started that when he was 15 years old.
That's impressive.
And I talk to him a lot. I interact with him as much as I can, pretty much every day. But we don't get to talk as much as I'd like, because he's so busy that he doesn't have time to call me. It's kind of like he's the dad. But community became really, really important after I moved to Hobbs. Like, I started making a lot of contacts here. Everybody was so nice, friendly, outgoing, forthcoming. And so that made me adopt those personality traits. Instead of being reserved, standoffish, because that's what you are when you live in Chicago. And I'd say I lived in Chicago for maybe about 6 years before I moved out here. And I would say I'm blessed. I really do feel blessed that God guided me toward Hobbes. I really do believe that he helped me find my way and get here and start writing and getting closer to that goal in second grade of writing a book. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the city of Hobbs, for this whole area, because it shaped me into what I wanted to be. And that's a published author. And I'm already thinking about plot lines for the next book. The next one I decided is going to also be nonfiction, a memoir. And it's most likely going to focus on, I'd say, about the last year of my life. And the last year of my life has been, I would say, a mess. And like, I had a dog for about 6 months. Her name was Memoir. And I just couldn't handle a big dog. Like, all the responsibilities, plus she was only a year old, and chewing up everything in the house or in the apartment. I lost, I think, 5 pairs of slippers and about 5 pairs of shoes because Amor chewed them up. And I couldn't keep the apartment organized. It was basically causing me to kind of go insane. And I'm not the most organized person in general, so having a big dog in my life, it was just not working. And when I do write a book coming up, I know Amor is going to be one of the characters. And I was even thinking about writing having the title be Amor is Hell, because my experience with Amor, it really was hell. And I'm so glad to be out of it. I found her some new owners about a month ago, because I took her to the dog park a lot. And one of my former students, his name's Ethan Barrett, and he has a girlfriend, and they've been together about 2 years. She loves dogs too. And they are really just the perfect dog owners. They're patient, they're kind, they're giving. And I asked Ethan if he wanted to have another dog. And he said they were talking about that like before I even started going to the dog park. And also they have a dog, and his name's Pog, P-O-G, and Pog is a male, and Pog is even more hyper than Amor. But those two dogs love each other. And Ethan actually brought Amor over a few days ago, and I could tell she loves him. And I can tell she likes her new life. And that makes me happy.
Pete, what other questions do you have?
Well, I was curious too about what was next in the works for you as far as a book and a writing project, Rich, and I think you've answered that. But one thing too, you've certainly given the impression that reading is essential to being able to write. You know, that people cannot write without reading and reading a lot, and going back for a minute to Stephen King, but this could probably be true for many authors, maybe even somebody, John Irving. Do you think that ability, once Stephen King got well known and sold a lot, to get anything published, do you think that diluted the quality of some of his fiction? And I ask because I don't know, I haven't read much of it.
Yes, I really do believe that it diluted the quality, like you said. There's one book that he wrote, this was maybe 10 years ago, and it's about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And he wrote a book about a guy who can travel back in time. And so this guy decides he's going to travel back in time in order to prevent John F. Kennedy's death. And you can tell that King worked his butt off on that story. And it's actually the closest he's come to actually writing, I would say, a masterpiece. Where it's, the enjoyment of reading it, that's true for almost everything he does, but this book was artful. So, when I finished it, I really did feel like I read a classic. And if anybody reads anything by Stephen King, it should be the one about John F. Kennedy's death. And the title of the book is just the date of his death. And I believe that was in 1963. In the fall,
November.
like 11/23. Yeah, 11/23/63. With John Irving, I've never read an author that can take you, like in one chapter, you're crying like a baby because it's so sad. And he touches what's inside of many parents, like who maybe lose a child. He touches that human quality that we all have, and it just makes you feel the pain that like a parent would feel if they did lose a child. And then in the next chapter, he writes the most hilarious chapter you've ever read. Mm-hmm. And that happens in A Widow for 1 Year. It has the funniest chapter I've ever read in my whole life. And I think it takes a little while to get to that part, but it's worth it. I was laughing out loud, like I was by myself, but I was laughing out loud, and my stomach started hurting because I was laughing so much. So John Irving, he's able to bring your emotions out. He's able, I guess you could say, he's able to help you live a little bit more. When I was growing up, because of my Asperger's syndrome, I barely socialized. I just stayed home a whole lot reading books. I had some friends, but I never had really good friends until I got, I'd say, into 6th grade. So I spent a lot of my childhood just reading books. And that's how I learned about the world. And then I would say once I was 32 years old when I moved here. Once I was 32 years old, that's when I started learning about the world by being in it and reaching out to people. And I had to do that because of my job. If I didn't do that, I couldn't eat. So it's kind of funny that it started out as survival, me being more outgoing. But then the longer I had the job, the more it became a characteristic of mine to be outgoing. And like people who knew me when I was in my 20s, they would be shocked. They would be completely shocked by who I am now. And I feel like I'm blessed. I feel like God wanted me to be in this area so I could basically fulfill my purpose, with helping other people.
Right. Before we wrap things up, you are also an artist. What kind of art do you do?
But when you say I'm an artist, I would have to say that I kind of used to be an artist because I don't actually practice art anymore. But like back when I was in college, I was able to go to college because I had a writing scholarship and an art scholarship. And the art scholarship was actually quite a bit higher than the writing one. And to keep those scholarships, I had to take like maybe 2 or 3 classes every year in those subjects. Before I even learned to write, I was amazing at drawing pictures. And I could make them so realistic. Even like in first grade, I did a picture of a horse. And I went to a Cub Scouts event where we got to show off our talents. So I brought that picture of the horse in a frame. And, the parents that walked by the table, they were basically in awe that I did that because I was only in first grade. And I would say it's almost professional looking. And now I use words to draw pictures. And I think of writing as basically drawing pictures with words.
Well said.
And there's another author that I should mention. His name's Clive Barker, and he's a well-known horror writer like Stephen King. Clive Barker is an artist, and I haven't brought a book with me. If you guys want to look at it, and it has Clive Barker's illustrations. But he believes that art is really, really important with his writing. And if he doesn't express himself through art, like he can't be a good writer. I'm still fascinated with art. I still love going to art museums. I went to the Van Gogh exhibit in Tucson, March of last year, and that was called Van Gogh, the Immersive Experience. Because you get to go, there's this one room you go into, and it's huge. And they show a film, and the film is all around you. And it's like on a big screen all around you. And they must have spent like 2 years making that film. And when you watch that film, it's almost like you're having an out-of-body experience. And because it was so good, I stayed there and watched it again. It's probably about 15, 20 minutes. and supposedly they were going to do the same thing with Monet, and I have to check into it to see if that might be out right now.
Pete, I think we're coming close to the end of our time. Do you have anything else?
Just wanted to thank Rich for being our guest today and giving his news about living in the world and reading about the world and writing about the world. We sure appreciate it, Rich.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you guys inviting me on the show, and I had a great time talking to you. I would love to come back sometime later, and this is really good what you guys are doing in Hobbs.
And maybe we can do a book launch at one of our next open mic.
Right. Sure.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, folks, for listening to Lee County Pod.